For most of The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf seems almost surprised by Saruman's betrayal. When he finally arrives at Isengard, he listens to Saruman's offer, rejects it, and is imprisoned atop Orthanc. On the surface, it looks like the moment Gandalf first discovers the truth. But what if that isn't what happened at all? What if Gandalf feared Saruman long before he ever had proof? Why did he spend years investigating secrets behind Saruman's back? Why was he so reluctant to trust the head of his own order? And why, whenever the fate of the One Ring was discussed, did Gandalf seem increasingly uneasy about the White Wizard who was supposed to be Middle-earth's greatest ally? The truth is that Gandalf's fear of Saruman did not begin at Orthanc. It began years earlier, with a series of warning signs that few others noticed. Welcome back to Middle-earth Explained. Let's get started.
I did.
Saruman.
You've been busy of late, my friend.
Before we can understand why Gandalf grew suspicious of Saruman, we have to understand something important. He did not begin as Saruman's rival. In fact, he deeply respected him. Both wizards were members of the Astari, the order sent to Middle-earth to help oppose Sauron. But Saruman was no ordinary wizard. He was the chief of the order, the White Wizard, and the one considered the wisest among them.
I must see the head of my order. He is both wise and powerful. Trust me, Frodo. You'll know what to do.
Even Gandalf acknowledged his superior knowledge, particularly when it came to the lore of the Rings of Power. For centuries, Saruman was one of the most respected figures in Middle-earth. He held a leading position in the White Council, advised the wise, and was trusted by some of the greatest powers of the age. To most people, Saruman appeared to be exactly what Middle-earth needed, a brilliant leader devoted to the fight against darkness. Yet, Gandalf saw a side of Saruman that others often overlooked. He noticed the White Wizard's growing pride.
What proof do we have this weapon came from Angmar's grave?
I have none.
Because there is none.
Saruman increasingly valued his own wisdom above the counsel of others and became less willing to share information, even with his closest allies. These were not crimes nor proof of treachery, but they were warning signs. And Gandalf understood something that many did not. Throughout the history of Arda, pride had often been the first step toward corruption. At first, it was only a concern, but over time, that concern began to grow.
So the Ring of Power has been found.
All these long years, it was in the Shire, under my very nose.
The first major warning sign came from a subject that fascinated Saruman more than almost anything else: the One Ring. After Sauron's defeat at the end of the Second Age, the ring had vanished. Centuries passed without a trace of it, and most of Middle-earth assumed it was lost forever. Saruman, however, became obsessed with its history. At first, this seemed completely reasonable. As the leading expert on ring lore, he was the natural person to study one of the greatest dangers in the world. He spent years researching the Rings of Power, gathering knowledge that few others possessed. But gradually, Gandalf noticed something troubling. Whenever the ring was discussed, Saruman always seemed eager to control the conversation.
He needs the one. And that ring was lost long, long ago. It was swept out to sea by the waters of the Anduin.
He spoke with authority, dismissed opposing views, and repeatedly assured the White Council that the One Ring had likely been carried down the Anduin River and swept into the sea. That conclusion had an important consequence. If the ring was truly gone forever, there was no need to search for it, and that is exactly what happened. For years, the wise accepted Saruman's judgment. The hunt for the ring effectively stalled, and many stopped worrying about it altogether. But Gandalf was not entirely convinced. Something about Saruman's certainty bothered him. The White Wizard seemed less interested in finding the truth than in making sure everyone accepted his version of it. There was still no proof of wrongdoing. Yet Gandalf could not shake the feeling that Saruman's interest in the ring had become something more than scholarly curiosity. And before long, another disturbing pattern began to emerge.
Without the Ring of Power, Sauron can never again hold dominion over Middle-earth. Go now. Leave Sauron to me.
As the years passed, Gandalf's unease was fueled by something even more troubling than Saruman's obsession with the ring. his growing secrecy. The White Council existed so that the wisest leaders of Middle-earth could share information and make decisions together. Yet Saruman increasingly acted as though knowledge was something to be controlled rather than shared. Important discoveries seemed to stay in his possession. Questions were often met with half-answers, and despite being the head of the council, he appeared less interested in cooperation and more interested in directing events himself. To many, this hardly seemed suspicious. He was proud, brilliant, and long accustomed to being the leading authority among the wise. But Gandalf saw a dangerous pattern developing. The more Saruman learned, the less transparent he became.
They speak of a necromancer living in Dol Guldur, a sorcerer who summoned the dead.
That's absurd. No such power exists in this world.
This was especially concerning because the threat of Sauron was growing once again. The necromancer had established himself in Dol Guldur. Dark forces were stirring across Middle-earth, and the wise needed accurate information more than ever. Yet Saruman repeatedly urged caution and delay, particularly when action might reveal information he wanted to keep hidden. Looking back, we know why. Saruman had already begun secretly searching the regions around the Anduin for traces of the One Ring. Gandalf did not know that yet, but he could sense that the White Wizard was no longer telling the whole truth, and for the first time, suspicion was beginning to replace trust. If you enjoyed the video so far, don't forget to drop a like.
Saruman believes that it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found.
Eventually, Gandalf reached a point where he could no longer rely solely on Saruman's judgment. That alone says a great deal. For centuries, Saruman had been the greatest authority on ring lore in Middle-earth. If anyone should have been trusted on matters concerning the One Ring, it was him. Yet Gandalf increasingly found himself conducting investigations without Saruman's knowledge. One of the clearest examples involved Bilbo's mysterious ring. After Bilbo returned from Erebor, Gandalf became curious about the strange object he had brought back from the Misty Mountains. At first, it seemed harmless enough, but certain details did not sit right with him. Instead of simply accepting Saruman's conclusions about the fate of the One Ring, Gandalf began quietly gathering information on his own. He visited old libraries, searched ancient records, and followed leads that Saruman had largely dismissed.
Here follows the account of Isildur, High King of Gondor, and the finding of the Ring of Power.
Most importantly, he kept many of these efforts to himself. Why? Because by this point, Gandalf no longer fully trusted the White Wizard's advice. That does not mean he knew Saruman was a traitor. Far from it. Gandalf still hoped there was a reasonable explanation for the inconsistencies and secrecy he had observed over the years. But his actions reveal something important. When the fate of the ring was at stake, Gandalf chose independent investigation over blind trust. And as his search continued, he uncovered evidence that would eventually prove Saruman's assurances were dangerously wrong. The gap between the two wizards was growing wider, and it was about to become impossible to ignore.
Where are you going?
There are some things that I must see to.
What things?
Questions. Questions that need answering.
I don't understand.
By this point, Gandalf had gathered enough warning signs to be deeply concerned. But concern was not proof. That distinction mattered. Saruman was not only the head of the White Council, he was one of the most respected figures in Middle-earth. An accusation without evidence could divide the very people trying to resist Sauron. So Gandalf did what he always did best. He remained patient, he watched, he investigated, and he quietly followed leads that others ignored. Yet the more he learned, the harder it became to dismiss the feeling that something was wrong. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too many of Saruman's actions no longer made sense. For years, Gandalf lived with an uncomfortable possibility. What if the greatest ally of the Free Peoples was already drifting toward the darkness? It was a fear he could never prove, and that is what made it so dangerous. Then, in 3018 of the Third Age, he rode to Isengard, and finally received the answer he had been dreading for years.
Build me a home worthy of Mordor.
For years, Gandalf had noticed the warning signs, the pride, the secrecy, the obsession with the ring, the growing gap between what Saruman said and what he actually did. But he still lacked one thing: proof. proof. That proof finally came when Gandalf rode to Isengard in the year 3018 of the Third Age. He had come seeking advice about the One Ring. Instead, he walked straight into the truth he had spent years fearing. Saruman dropped the mask. No longer pretending to oppose Sauron, he openly revealed his desire for power.
We must join with Sauron. It would be wise, my friend.
He spoke of joining with the Dark Lord, at least for a time, and hinted that they could eventually seize the ring for themselves. In Saruman's mind, wisdom and strength justified such a path. For Gandalf, it was the final confirmation. The respected leader of the White Council had become exactly what he had once sworn to resist. When Gandalf refused to join him, Saruman imprisoned him atop Orthanc.
But you have elected the way of pain!
To many, this was the moment Saruman's betrayal was revealed. But for Gandalf, it was something else. It was the moment years of suspicion finally became certainty. In the end, Gandalf never uncovered Saruman's betrayal through a single revelation or hidden document. He recognized it because he paid attention to the warning signs others overlooked. Long before Orthanc, he saw the pride, the secrecy, and the growing obsession that were slowly changing the White Wizard. Yet, without proof, all he could do was watch, question, and investigate. When Saruman finally revealed his true intentions, Gandalf was still disappointed, but he was no longer surprised. Orthanc did not create his fears, it simply confirmed them.
There is only one Lord of the Ring, and he does not share power.
So you have chosen death.
If you like this kind of video, join the channel and leave a like for more content like this. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you on the next one.